News now. So President Putin says those who are responsible for the failed mutiny in Russia will be held accountable. This comes after reports have emerged that the Wagner leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, who led the failed mutiny, has arrived in Belarus. For more on this, we are now joined by our correspondent, Dasha Chernyshova. Dasha, a good morning to you. Thank you so much for your time. I think let's go really through the list of the points that have been made by President Putin, and then the latest about what we know about the whereabouts of Prigozhin.
Well, we don't know the exact location of Yevgeny Prigozhin. There have been some conflicting reports with the sources citing that Prigozhin's business jet has landed in Minsk, but other sources have been suggesting that his jet has landed in St. Petersburg. This is where the headquarters of the Wagner private mercenary group are located. So certainly this is yet to be confirmed by Yevgeny Prigozhin himself. In his latest 11-minute audio, he didn't precise where he was or what his future plans were. Instead, what he was saying was the cause and the justification of what he called the march of justice toward the Russian capital. Following that address, we have heard the Russian president also addressing the nation and calling Yevgeny Prigozhin's activities criminal ones, and saying again that he would keep his promise and Wagner fighters would be able to join the Russian military one way or another, but there will be no criminal prosecution against them. He once again praised the contribution of those fighters, calling them real patriots. But now we are hearing from Russian Federal Security Service saying that they have dropped the case against those who have incited the armed rebellion on the 23rd of June, and according to the Russian Federal Security Service, have stopped this armed rebellion themselves on the 24th of June. So now we understand that indeed the promise has been kept. Yevgeny Prigozhin, under the deal that has been brokered by the Belarusian leader, will be going to Belarus, but again we are yet to have this confirmation. But also another information that is important here is the fact that Yevgeny Prigozhin's Wagner mercenary group is now expected to hand over the military equipment to Russia's Ministry of Defense, and the body has confirmed that that was now in preparation. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's an interesting development, and then of course there's still really the question around what the intention behind some of these actions really were, where you've got the leader of the Wagner Group having spoken out and saying that the force's intention never was to overthrow the Russian government. I mean, it certainly is an interesting point that he made as he started to speak out yesterday. I'm talking now about Prigozhin.
Well, Yevgeny Prigozhin has cited basically two reasons. He said that that was a demonstration of his protest, of his group protest against the military commanders of Russia. He said that his military group was about to cease to exist, and one of the causes for that, according to Yevgeny Prigozhin, was the law that has been signed by the Russian president and that obliges all the volunteer detachments involved in the so-called special military operation in Ukraine to sign contracts with Russia's Ministry of Defense by the 1st of July. He has rejected this offer, saying that his fighters would not obey by the rules of Russia's Ministry of Defense. Now, another reason that Yevgeny Prigozhin has been citing was to make a master class of what should have happened on the 24th of June 2022. With regards to that, he has been making comparisons to his movement from Rostov-on-Don towards the Russian capital and what happened back then when Russia started its so-called special military operation. But what is also important here is the very fact that Wagner Group boss has said he did not intend to overthrow the Russian government. So he said that was not the goal, and that's why he has made the decision to stop the march of his convoy in order to avoid the bloodshed of the Russian people.
Yeah, I mean, what's the sort of clarity that we've got also around perhaps the support behind this group that was wanting to lead this failed mutiny in Russia, particularly from a resource point of view, Dasha?
Well, certainly over the course of the past months, we've heard a lot about Wagner Group. We didn't hear that much about this group since it has been founded. It was actually in the gray zone. Now that this group was involved in the operations in Ukraine, Yevgeny Prigozhin was listened to, and many people wanted to hear what he thought and what he said with regards to the ongoing special military operation. Many have been saying that he was the first one to bring in simple and understandable terms to the Russian people the course of the operation. But it is very difficult to say what the Russian people would think of him now, because indeed the Russian president and the Russian officials have all made their point very clear. That is not the right time to have the split within Russia, to destabilize the situation from within, because in the eyes of Russian officials, Moscow is facing unprecedented challenges to its security and independence, because it is in fight with the Western countries on all fronts.
I think what you were able to see certainly in the days coming up, particularly over the weekend, was some of the startling images in some of the city streets in Moscow, where we were starting to see really physically what this mutiny was looking like. How do you describe what the streets are looking like at the moment? And has that tension that we saw as those images went global over the weekend really simmered down?
Well, they are gone because the counter-terrorism operations regime has been lifted in the Russian capital, in Moscow region, as well as in Voronezh region. Now, some of the reminiscence of what has been happening probably remain on the highway M4 Don, which connects Rostov-on-Don to the Russian capital. This is the highway that the Russian authorities have used to not to allow Yevgeny Prigozhin to get to the Russian capital. But again, President Putin has said himself that he was personally involved into decision-making, and his orders were to not to disturb the life of the Russians, as well as not to spill the blood. So that's why he said it took that period of time for the Wagner fighters to sober up their minds, to come to terms and to understand what they were doing. So essentially, we cannot really see that the life has changed significantly. Yes, indeed, there was increased police presence in Moscow streets. There was heavy armory, but now it is all gone, and Muscovites wouldn't be remembering that anything has happened in the streets.
Yeah, I know this might be a difficult one to answer, but certainly I think it's going to bring about quite a bit of curiosity. Well, you've got the Russian President Vladimir Putin saying that those responsible will be held accountable. Do we know what that means, what that's going to look like when he says they will be held accountable? Are we talking about criminal charges? What does that look like?
Well, indeed, it's very hard to predict, because the Russian FSB has said that they are dropping the criminal charges against the Wagner Group and against those who have been perpetrating this armed rebellion. And that is probably part of the deal. So it is very hard to see how else those who have been involved could be taken accountable. An option here is that Yevgeny Prigozhin would not be allowed to enter the Russian territory. But again, you have Alexander Lukashenko, the leader of Belarus, who has personally mediated those negotiations and suggested that Prigozhin will now be stationed in Belarus, and Belarus and Russia make the Union state. So certainly it is yet to be seen.
Yeah, Dasha, thank you so much for that update. That's our correspondent speaking to us in Moscow, Russia, Dasha Chernyshova.